It's this land that drew us back here. My grandfather, he wanted better for his children. My father wanted better for his children, and of course we do. That's why they love this land and they hold on to it. They want to pass it to them.
In 1865, the U.S. government promised newly freed Black Americans 40 acres and a mule, providing an opportunity for them to build wealth and independence.
Land has always been about freedom, political freedom, physical freedom, economic freedom.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
But that promise was broken again and again and again.
Black farmers and other Black landowners have repeatedly been targeted to have their property taken.
Do you think that you would have been that much further ahead if you were one of your white counterparts?
Oh, yes. We would not have lost the land. We would have gotten the loans and the services that all farmers should get through the government.
While some are rediscovering hope in collective action,
we cannot beg other people to give us anything, and that's what freedom is about, the freedom to manifest what we know we deserve.
For others, the struggle continues.
You got to fight for your land. You got to fight to keep it. Daddy had lived a good life, you know, up north when he was in Massachusetts. But there was something here that brought him back. And I know it's that desire to farm, the quietness. It's a wonderful place to raise your children, you know, and it still is. My father wouldn't have ever thought that I would come back here and do any farming. He wouldn't have thought anybody would come back, especially me. So you never know. You can't say, well, you know, none of the children are going to come back, so, you know, we might as well sell it. Same thing with even the old tractors. One of the tractors is 80 years old. Dad could have very easily said, well, I'm going to get rid of these tractors. Nobody's ever going to use them again. But here we are, farming with those same old tractors.
Veteran and retired teacher Mark Smith lives with his wife Janet on the land his family has owned since 1926. Mark's grandfather, a sharecropper, had traded his cotton harvest for these 600 acres during the height of the Jim Crow era.
This is my grandmother, and that's she and Papa right there. Those are the ones who bought this house, bought this property.
And this is your family. This is what came from that.
Right, these are the children and everybody that came from that. This is out in front of the house. This is Daddy, my mother, and all of the children. They were all very successful people. And I know where it comes from. It comes from this land. So, you know, we do everything we can to protect that and hold on to it. You know, don't sell it, don't give it away, don't let anybody take it.
Land equals freedom in so many ways. Historically, land equaled freedom in the sense that there was physical space, a separation between Black people and people who oppressed them. And then being able to use your own expertise to produce resources for your family and be economically independent, that created freedom. People really don't understand the importance of the Black farmer in the African-American experience. The Black churches were often on land that had been given by a Black farmer, or the Black schools were located on land that a Black farmer had provided.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
Because enslaved Africans could not own property, it wasn't until 1865 that Black Americans were able to formally request land from the government. But the opportunity only arose after a massacre of newly freed people at the hands of Union General Jefferson C. Davis during the Civil War. In December 1864, Davis took an opportunity to shed himself of the freed people, following his troops to safety at Ebenezer Creek. He got his soldiers across the creek using pontoon bridges, but stranded the freed women, children, and elderly on the other side. despite a Confederate cavalry following close behind.
The best figure that we can come up with is that hundreds of people apparently drowned in the creek trying to get across. In other words, they chose death over slavery. The eyewitnesses that saw what happened at the creek were absolutely horrified. And so it becomes this huge public relations disaster for the Lincoln administration. Here is, again, an army that's supposed to be liberating people, and it's causing the deaths of hundreds of people. So when Sherman takes Savannah in mid-December of 1864, Secretary of War Stanton ends up coming to Savannah, both to investigate what happened at Ebenezer Creek, but then also to figure out what are we going to do with all of these thousands of black people in the coastal area of Georgia that are now free. So on January the 12th, 1865, that evening, there was a meeting held at Sherman's headquarters, and there were 20 African-American leaders that were invited. Now, all 20 of these African-American leaders were either black ministers or black lay leaders.
67-year-old freedman Garrison Frazier, a Baptist minister, acted as the church leader's spokesperson. When asked what the freedmen needed to take care of themselves and maintain their freedom, Frazier replied, "The way we can best take care of ourselves is to have land and turn it and till it by our own labor." 4 days later, General William T. Sherman issued Special Field Order No. 15, which confiscated 400,000 acres of Confederate land and distributed it to freed people in 40-acre parcels. Later, the Army provided some of them with mules.
The idea was to respond to that need for land, respond for that need for economic independence and self-sufficiency, with the idea that eventually they would be able to sustain themselves.
But less than a year after the special order was issued, President Andrew Johnson returned most of the land back to its previous white owners. This is what became known as the broken promise of 40 acres and a mule.
I think this idea of 40 acres and a mule centralized the agrarian traditions of African-American people within the rural South, within the Black Belt. And land, of course, was central to that and central to their economic independence. But it also was the beginning of missed opportunities and unfulfilled promises.
So guys, thank you for coming, and everybody.
Thank you guys for all you are doing.
No, it's every one of us.
It takes a team.
You put that sign in front of your house and you speak up, you know what, you're just as powerful as anything else.
Yeah.
In April 2022, a private railroad company sent letters to the Smiths and other residents of their predominantly black neighborhood, asking to purchase some of their property. The company has plans to construct a railroad to transport building materials and timber. Around 3/4 of a mile of track would cut through the middle of the Smiths family's property and would sit about 700 yards behind Mark and Janet's house. After the Smiths refused to sell, the company petitioned for eminent domain, a legal practice the government or a private utility can use to seize private citizens' land for just compensation if it's for the public good. The Sandersville Railroad Company claims that the railroad would annually generate at least $1.5 million for the county.
You can see where the markers are and where the train came up through, where it's to come this way and go across. We're on my nephew's property right now. Well, my nephew's is going to cross his, and then it's going to cross my brother Williams, because he has three tracks here. He's going to go across all 3 of his pieces.
In terms of distance, length, what are we talking about here?
It's pretty wide. It's pretty wide. And that's an issue, but that's not the only issue. What about your grandkids and kids and things? They come back here. You got a train, you know? What about people on the train? I mean, just all kinds of reasons we don't want it here. Environmental problem, noise.
Derailment.
Derailment, fires, you know, toxic waste. What about waste? What are you going to bring through here? You're going to be bringing any kind of chemicals? And then on top of that, all of this, the value of it, it plummets. You know, it's not worth what it was.
Our sons will inherit something with somebody else's name on it, because it's a lifetime.
It's forever.
It's forever.
We want to keep our property clean and clear, just like it's been for the last 97 years with us. And we're going to fight to keep it that way.
The Sandersville Railroad Company says the new track would be used for one round-trip train per day that travels at 20 miles per hour to minimize noise. The company also says it complies with all state and federal environmental guidelines. Land ownership is a crucial tool for wealth building and independence, both of which Black Americans have struggled to attain since being transported to the U.S. against their will centuries ago. The total area of Black-owned farmland peaked over 100 years ago at 16 million acres, but has since plummeted more than 70%, totaling an estimated loss of $326 billion.
Black Americans have been the target of vitriolic racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired their ownership in the land. Some of that manifested itself in extralegal violence. A substantial number of Black Americans who were lynched were actually upwardly mobile African Americans, both socially and economically. In addition to the extralegal, there's been any number of technically legal ways in which Black Americans have lost land.
Historically, urban renewal and eminent domain have separated hundreds of thousands of African Americans from their property.
Redlining, the practice of mortgage lenders denying loans to people based on their race or where they live. The promise of aid that fails to materialize is all too familiar to many farmers of color, long subjected to discrimination in government programs.
In the case of Black farmers, the whole process of getting a loan approved was just awful. You had people who were supposed to help you, and these government agencies who didn't and worked against you. In some cases, land would get targeted, and they would help make sure you were not successful and lose it. My father was murdered by a white farmer who was not prosecuted. I made a commitment on the night of my father's death to stay in the South, which was not what I intended to do, to stay in the South and devote my life to working for change.
In 1969, civil rights activists Shirley Sherrod and her husband Charles founded New Communities, one of the first community land trusts in the country.
We decided that Black people had lost land so much through the years, we wanted to develop a way of not losing the land. So the land would be held in trust, which meant we would all own it. But then the opposition from white people, you know, there were times they would shoot at the buildings. They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
To intimidate you.
Yes, we had a pretty big farming operation going until we ran into droughts in the 70s. So it forced us to go to the local USDA office to try to get an emergency loan like all farmers were getting. The guy said, "You'll get a loan here over my dead body."
Really?
Yes. Put us into a 3-year fight just to try to get a loan with continued drought and not having the money needed to operate the farm in the way that it should have been operated.
So essentially you all were squeezed out of ownership.
Yes, there were programs that they should have been offering us, which would have given us a chance to save everything.
Several reports published between 1965 and 1997 from both federal civil rights committees and a commission group confirmed the USDA has consistently failed to provide Black farmers equal access to loans.
Not surprising, Black Americans who were farmers began calling the USDA decades ago the last plantation. And Black farmers have been saying for the longest time that they were being denied loans that they were totally qualified for.
The nation's African-American farmers are stepping up pressure on federal agricultural officials to end what they say is racism by the government.
In 1997, Timothy Pigford and 400 fellow black farmer plaintiffs filed a class action lawsuit against the USDA. Known as Pigford v. Glickman, it alleged the USDA discriminated against black farmers in its allocation of loans.
We have not done enough. I accept that. We need to pay reparations for documented cases of past discrimination.
In settling the Pigford cases, there was a process set up where individual black farmers had to make their case. Initially, a lot of the farmers were left out of the settlement because of just incredibly poor notice. But you ultimately did have actually 2 rounds of Pigford.
Pigford 1 and 2 settlements added up to more than $2 billion. New Communities members received $13 million, which was used to revive their operation decades after its foreclosure.
It's 1,638 acres. This place was once owned by the largest slave owner and the wealthiest man in Georgia at that time in the 1800s. Now we started planning and looking at how we could take a place that had a bad beginning in terms of slavery and use that to work with our people. And that's what we're busy doing.
While the Sherrods were able to regain what they'd lost, for the other estimated 30,000 plus approved claimants, most received $50,000.
Pigford is not nothing, but the notion that it's reparations, upon closer examination, just doesn't hold water. An economic estimate of the farmland black farmers lost between 1920 and 1997, $326 billion. So when you compare $2 billion from Pigford that was sold as reparations, was sold as making people whole, and you compare it to the level of harm, it's obviously the level of harm is orders of magnitude higher.
A recent analysis found that the USDA provided a disproportionately low share of direct loans to black farmers in 2022. But the department is making efforts to close that gap. In 2022, the Biden administration launched the USDA's Equity Commission, on which Shirley Sherrod serves as a member. $2.2 billion have also been earmarked for farmers who have faced discrimination before 2021, but the funds have yet to be released.
This is our Independence Day, amen? All right.
Black Americans are still finding ways to build generational wealth and create safe havens for their communities, in the same spirit as the Sherrod's Community Land Trust and the black settlements that have developed throughout history.
For us, it's this idea of kuji chakalia, self-determination. This idea that as people from in a part of the African diaspora have a responsibility to make our world a better place. And we cannot wait for other people to do it. We cannot beg other people to give us anything. And that's what freedom is about, the freedom to manifest what we know we deserve.
Ashley Scott, along with Renee Walters and Laura Riley Cooper, are founding members of what started as a collective of 19 black families that bought 500 acres of land together. They are now building a whole new town called Freedom, Georgia.
On our own 502 acres to be celebrating Juneteenth, to see the children, to see the elders, to see all of these people have traveled far and wide to be here, it feels amazing. It feels like freedom, it feels like healing, it feels like love to watch my children play on the dirt, on land that we own, and that our ancestors, you know, prayed for us to be able to have this kind of experience. It means everything. Watch your toes, watch your toes. Collective ownership is powerful. Our ancestors practiced it. So it's almost as if we're tapping into those same successful energies that allowed our ancestors to prosper. And my children are tapping into that energy.
It's important because it creates generational wealth, something that didn't seem obtainable for us as Black people. And it's just a way for us to leave something for our children, like build a legacy and just have something like wealth for our children. 3 years ago, I didn't think that I would have 500 acres. So the average person doesn't really think that it's obtainable until you see other people, other regular people going out and buying land. We want to inspire all the Black people that we can. Go get you some land and build wealth for your family.
I understand this thing about generational wealth, generational properties. I know that through the years, we did not have the opportunities to get real estate. It was not available to us. Even today, even what's happening right now with this trying to grab our land. You see, this has happened to a lot of people, and it's happened through all the years. And that is the reason that so many Black people suffer now in poverty.
I feel that no one owes me anything. I serve a powerful God, a powerful Jesus. I've not suffered. In fact, I am humbled. And I've taught my sons the same thing. I said, God is the great equivocator. If you're looking over your shoulder and you're looking for something, you're not going to find it and you're not going to get it that way. You look ahead.